Hello, this is Herman Ostrik with OTAC, and today we have an exciting topic, and it's going to be called critical test results. And when I talk with a lot of users in PACS world, they typically are pretty happy with the PACS system, but the most common complaint I get is that there's not a good way in the PACS systems to communicate if there's any critical findings. There's no good way of implementing that into the PACS system itself, so it's kind of a gap that is present, and well, there is definitely a requirement to communicate critical findings. So what I did, I switched on a little bit, and I came to Mark. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing good. How are you today, Herman?
Great. So Mark is actually has quite a bit of experience with this topic, and so I thought that I'll let Mark talk a little bit about this particular topic, and then we have a little Q&A. So the topic is critical test results, and how do we integrate it in the PACS? Go ahead, Mark. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Herman, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about critical test results management. First of all, just kind of a little background on CTRM. Some of the reasons that people are interested in CTRM is that you can quickly speed results from where the diagnosis is first done to where it's needed, such as the ordering physician. So you can automate the CTRM process. That can often be a bottleneck. When you speak with radiologists, often as they find critical results, it's then difficult to get those critical results to the correct person, to the ordering physician. And they can end up playing phone tag. Hospitals are busy environments, and it can also often be an unproductive process. There's also some security concerns. You want to make sure, because this is sensitive patient information, that you are protecting it properly and meeting all the HIPAA guidelines. So with a critical test results system, you can automate that process. And so the benefits are you increase patient safety because you're communicating those results more quickly, and then the therapy becomes started more quickly. It helps ensure that you meet Joint Commission compliance. Joint Commission has Goal 2, which specifically deals with the communication of critical results, and a CTRM system can help with that. So it improves both the experience for the caregiver and also for the radiologist. They both see improvements. And it also can help you guard against malpractice suits because you're making sure that critical results are not being lost somewhere in the process. A typical critical results process, a physician will come to see their patient. The patient may be referred then by her primary care physician. In this case, in the chart, I'm calling the patient Sue and her physician, Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones diagnoses Sue's case. If he determines that it is a critical result, he then very quickly needs to communicate to the caregiver. Now that could be done in a number of different ways, but we have found that that often can take as much as 25 minutes because at times you will not reach the proper caregiver. You may get into the phone tag kind of a scenario, and so that can take quite a while. With a CTRM system, you can greatly automate that process. The process would start in a similar manner. The patient, Sue, would see her physician. Dr. Jones would diagnose the exam. But now, rather than having to go through a manual process to communicate the critical results would be sent directly from the radiology system, the PACS, and so forth. It would be sent to the correct physician. That physician could then acknowledge that they received the results, ask any questions that they may have, and the whole process can be a much more automated process. The radiologist would then know that the results have been received, and that whole process can be saved in the electronic health record. So a process that was something like 25 minutes can be shortened to something more like 3 minutes. So that productivity is important to the radiologist. So I'd like to talk a little bit about interfacing a CTRM system to the hospital's radiology IT systems. One of the common ways to do that is through the PACS. So for example, on the PACS you might see a patient work list similar to this. You would select a patient from that work list. You would bring up their exam. In this case, it's a CT exam of the head. Once you dictate that exam, if it was a critical exam, you would then identify to the system common ways, or maybe a function key or a button on the screen. You would identify that this is a critical result, and you would also identify who it needed to go to. That whole system then would be fairly automated. You would see the referring physician would get the results. They would acknowledge that they received it. If they have any questions, they would ask those, and then you would close the loop. So the radiologist would know that the critical results had been received and acted upon. Another common way to interface to a CTRM is through the speech recognition system for clients that have that type of a product. I'm showing an example of a speech mic on the slide here. And with that, it fits very well with the workflow, because after the radiologist finishes dictation, they can then identify that particular exam as a critical result. In this case, you can see the 4 function keys. They can use those to identify the acuity level. For instance, it might be, a very critical red, or it might be something that's urgent but not necessarily as critical. Some people also identify incidental findings, findings that may not be immediately critical, but something that you definitely do not want to slip through the cracks. So you can identify the function keys in different ways, and different customers will do that differently. Then you want to be able to send the alerts to a wide range of devices. Smart devices, tablets, smartphones are common in healthcare. You want to be able to access those devices. Some systems will also interact with voicemail systems, and so that can be important as well. So you really want a lot of flexibility in terms of the kinds of alerts that you send and how you can send those alerts. I also want to talk just a little bit about the steps in implementing a CTRM system. What you want to do first is establish what's happening now. Pretty much every hospital that I talk with, they have some process for handling critical results. So you want to understand how are they handled now, what kind of a time frame is involved in handling those critical results. From that, you can then begin to look at what is the advantage of automating that process. And so you can begin to put together the justification for it. And that usually involves both a patient quality justification and how you're helping the patient. There's also usually a cost savings portion, and that could be productivity for the site and other aspects of that. So usually it's a combination of the improvement of quality and the cost savings. So once you justify the project, then you'll want to understand what are the specific requirements that's needed for your institution. Some of the requirements will be similar between different institutions, but there usually be aspects that are unique as well. So you want to understand those. Then often clients will decide to develop a request for proposal. This is a formal document that you can then take to vendors that you're interested in, and it will lay out the requirements that are specific to your institution and allows the vendors to then respond to that. From that, you would normally go through a vendor selection process. You will have decided some number of vendors that you wish to have involved. From that, you'll need to narrow that list. There may be some follow-up questions and so forth, depending on the responses to the RFP. And then eventually, you'll probably get down to one vendor. Once you select that vendor, then there will be some project management involved. The vendor may supply some of that, but generally speaking, there's also a project management staff that's on site as well, because you have both what the vendors doing, but there's usually activities that need to happen on site as well. So I've seen very often that there will be a project manager from the vendor and one from the client as well. Once the project is implemented, and there may be some fine-tuning as the project is implemented. Once it's implemented, then you'll want to have training, and that training would be both on the new system, but there may also be some workflow changes that are happening, and so you'll want to train on that as well. Once the system is in operation, and you'll want it to be probably being used for some period, maybe 3 months, it's always interesting to go back and then do a project evaluation and see, did you achieve what you wanted to achieve, and compare back to the baseline that you established prior to starting the project and see if you met your goals. You may then want to do some additional fine-tuning, maybe set some additional goals that you'd like to achieve as well.
Okay, I have some questions, Mark. First of all, I'd like to make a comment. The last thing you mentioned is the going back after a couple of months and looking at a project implementation and see whether any improvements could be made. I think that's a great thing, and I think in general users try to forget that. They just implement a system and they go run with it and they think everything is okay, and they don't take the time a few months later to make sure that everything is indeed run as it's supposed to run. So I think that's a great comment, and I totally support that. I have a few questions though. First of all, these critical test results, is this specific to radiology, first of all, or is it for other applications too, or lab or whatever, or pathology? And then second, is it the same thing as the ER discrepancy reporting? Can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure, those are good questions. Critical results can come from a number of places. Radiology is one of the most common, and that's why I've talked quite a bit about it here in this presentation. But another area is lab. Lab actually produces quite a few more results than radiology.
Sure.
In radiology, the number of critical results, I've seen numbers somewhere in the 10% range. That can vary a lot depending on the institution's work. Lab may have 10 times as many tests done as the radiology department. Usually a smaller percentage of them are critical, but because so many lab tests are done, you can end up with a very significant number. So that is a very, very important area for CTRM. I've seen CTRM also used in cardiology as well. Pretty much anywhere in the hospital where you're generating a critical results that needs to be communicated to another physician, say an ordering physician, that is a good application for CTRM. Let me talk a little bit about the ER discrepancy. There is a lot of commonality between CTRM and ER discrepancy, but they are a little bit different. In ER discrepancy, you're typically looking at the difference between a preliminary diagnosis, we used to call those a wet read, say an ER physician does a quick diagnosis with the ER, then the following morning perhaps radiology will do the official diagnosis of that same case. ER discrepancy will look at the two, and then it'll decide with the aid of the radiologist, were the diagnosis the same, the preliminary in ER and the final in radiology, or was there a minor discrepancy, or was there a significant discrepancy? So some of the CTRM software systems do both because there are some similarities between the systems, but it is a little bit different. So you're looking specifically at the difference between a preliminary diagnosis and the official diagnosis, and do they differ? Is there a discrepancy?
Yeah. Is there actually a common signaling system, like everybody has the same significance on code red or orange or yellow or blue or whatever it is, or is it all depending on the implementation of the different manufacturers?
It is still evolving a little bit. Some of the leading institutions have proposed systems on which particular diseases would qualify as a red, and how quickly would you then need to take action based on that.
Yeah.
So I think there is a consensus is developing in the industry, and some of the leaders have put forward what they think definition should be. But there is still some variability between sites in terms of how they define the different colors. A good system will allow the customer to do some tailoring based on what may be unique to their situation.
Sure. Now, one of the concerns I have, and let me take an analogy of this system. For example, an analogy might be a voice recognition system. And I see a lot of voice recognition systems that are very well integrated, but I also see some of them poorly integrated. They still need a different monitor. They might have to re-enter some information. If the PAC system software changes, then the voice recognition has to be changed too. So first of all, what is the interface between these CTR systems and the PACS voice recognition? Is it like an application level interface? And is it generally well integrated, or is there still quite a few issues?
It will depend. I have seen some integrations that have been done fairly well, and others that aren't as coupled together, that are more separate, so you feel like you're dealing with two different systems. The common ways of interfacing are either through the speech recognition system, and that is a very natural way to interface because the radiologist is already using that for dictation, and then if they can push just one extra button or maybe use a keyword like critical,
sure.
That would key off the system, that fits very well with the workflow. But there are many hospitals that aren't using speech recognition, so other implementations are with the PACS or the RIS system, but I've also seen implementations where it's fairly standalone. The more seamless that integration is, the more the more it fits right into the workflow. Obviously, that's the preferred solution.
Yeah. We talked about these systems could be used for different departments. Do you see that there will be one system, for example, for lab, cardiology, radiology, but there's difficulty, of course, that you need to have multiple integrations? Or is it typically 3 different kind of standalone systems, or how does that work?
Yeah, I've seen both. Sometimes radiology it'll be a higher priority, so they're maybe funded, and they don't want to wait.
Oh, okay.
And vice versa. Sometimes maybe a higher priority in lab. I think the IT department, usually when I speak with them, they would prefer to have one system because they would prefer not to support a couple of different systems. That would be the ideal, would be that you have one system that's used throughout the hospital, but sometimes it doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, but and I think the complexity might increase because now you suddenly have to have multiple interfaces to the same system. So I guess it's kind of a trade-off.
That's correct as well.
Yeah.
In lab, you'll probably interface to a laboratory information system, so it is a bit different than radiology.
Yeah.
But then often they want to store that history, that audit trail, if you will. They would like to store that back into the patient record, so that would probably be the same between laboratory and radiology.
Don't you think that the EMR will be a logical place to have that interfaced with? Assuming that everybody, of course, has access to the electronic medical records.
Right. I do think, particularly in terms of saving that permanent record, that's what the physicians, most broadly will be using. So that does seem like the logical place to store that record of what happened with the critical result.
Okay. Well, I don't have any other questions. You have any final comments, Mark? I know you have a lot of experience and you're a consultant in this area. Maybe what you could comment on a little bit, what could a consultant do in this particular case for assisting clients that are looking for these systems? Go ahead.
Sure, I appreciate that. I have worked in this field for quite a few years. What I find is that often the hospitals are so busy in the day-to-day work that it's just very hard to get the time and resource to kind of step back and look at, what is our current workflow and how could we improve that with respect to critical results. So one thing a consultant can do is that they can come in, they can interview the staff, understand what's happening now, because they have experience with a number of sites. They may be able to share some best practices and really help the site analyze what are you doing now, what could you do in the future, and then maybe help them justify, both from a patient quality standpoint, patient safety standpoint, as well as from a financial standpoint, how to justify the project. Then once the project does get funded, then the client, may want to go out and select a number of vendors, so a consultant could help with writing down their requirements, developing a formal RFP if they want to go through a formal process, helping them with which vendors to send that to, helping them with the vendor selection. And then, if they choose to they have a consultant help them, the consultant could also help them with implementing the project and also that final audit at the end to see, did the project meet the goals.
Great. Okay, thank you, Mark. I really appreciate your time. I just like to finally say that the critical results reporting, like with any other up-to-date subjects like VNA, whatever, are definitely part of our PACS training classes. So if you really want to learn a bit more about fundamentals, consider taking one of our OTEC PACS training classes, or if you really want to go into details, DICOM 7, EMR, IHC as well. So thank you very much, Mark. And if you like this video, join us on Google Plus, or look for the next Hangout, because what we always try to do is talk about current topics and things that are of interest to our user community. Thank you very much.